Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of our course on peaceful living, peaceful dying. So I thought to start this morning with some meditation on some of the things we talked about yesterday but didn't have a chance to meditate on. So we'll begin, as usual, with the prayers and then go into the meditation after that.
It's crowded over here.
We'll just put it down on the floor. Okay. So those of you who are familiar with the prayers, comfortable with the prayers, can follow along. But if you're not familiar with Buddhist prayers and not comfortable with doing them, that's completely okay. You can just sit and meditate and generate positive thoughts in your mind. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So while reciting this next prayer of the four immeasurable thoughts, do it slowly and really try to generate in your mind the state of mind expressed by these words. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayame. Then we'll recite the mantra of the Buddha 3 times and really open your heart to the Buddha's wisdom, compassion, all his incredible qualities, and feel the wish to receive his energy, his blessing in your own mind so that you can begin cultivating those same qualities in yourself and follow in the Buddha's footsteps. Taya ta om mune mune Mahamanaye Soha Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye Soha Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye Soha. Okay, so let's sit quietly for a few minutes to try our best to settle down in the present. You may have been rushing around this morning, doing things, getting ready to come here. It's good to just sit quietly for a while and let our body and mind settle down. So sit in a position that's comfortable, but also conducive for meditation. That means if you can, keep your back straight, sit up straight. But the muscles in the body, except those needed to keep your back straight, should be as relaxed as possible. And if there's any tension, tightness, anywhere in the body, release it. You can imagine it melting and flowing out of you, sinking into the earth and disappearing. Now try to bring your body to a state that is as relaxed and free of tension as possible. And let your breathing flow in a natural rhythm. Don't try to control your breathing or interfere with it. There's no need to do that because our bodies know how to breathe. You don't need to be taught how to breathe, so you're breathing all the time. So just let your body breathe as it naturally does, as it needs to. And with your mind, your awareness, be aware of the breath as it's coming in and going out. One breath after another. So keep your attention focused on this natural rhythm of your breathing. And anytime a thought pops up in your mind or you get distracted by a sound or anything other than the breath, just let go of that other object and bring your attention, your awareness back to the breathing. So focusing on our breath in this way puts our mind in a state that's neutral, neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. And our teachers always advise us to be in a virtuous state of mind when we listen to teachings or do other Dharma activities. And the most positive or virtuous state of mind that we could possibly have is bodhicitta, which means the mind of enlightenment, the aspiration to become fully enlightened, a Buddha, for the benefit of all living beings. So probably many of you are familiar with that idea, that attitude, and can bring it up into your mind. If you're still new to learning Buddhism and not yet sure if you are able to reach enlightenment and if that's something you want to do, then try to at least have the wish to benefit others, which is called altruism. Altruism means wanting to help other people, other beings, and not harm them. So I think we all do feel that way, at least sometimes. We would like to help others, our community, our city, our country, the world. We like to help other beings as well, animals and so on, to relieve their suffering, their problems, and bring them greater peace and happiness. So just using your own thoughts, do your best to generate that state of mind and make that your motivation for being here. So for example, you could just think, I'm here because I want to work on myself. I want to learn things that will help me be a better person, be more helpful for others, less likely to cause problems and harm to others. So that's just a suggestion, but using your own thoughts, your own ideas, whatever works best for you, generate that frame of mind as your motivation for being here today. Okay, so first recall the first two main points of the meditation on death that we started looking at yesterday. The first point being that death is definite. So everyone has to die. Many people in this world have already died, and everyone else will die sooner or later, and that includes oneself. So death is something we will definitely have to face one day. So we may feel uneasy about that, uncomfortable, even frightened, but it's best to get used to that idea And the more we do contemplate it and familiarize ourselves with it, we will gradually become more accepting and more comfortable with it. The second of the three main points is that we don't know when we're going to die. The time of death is uncertain. And this is because human beings don't have a fixed lifespan. It's not that everyone lives to a certain age and then they die, but people die at all different ages and of all different causes. There's many causes that bring on death. So it's very uncertain when it will happen to us. So now let's contemplate the third main point, which is what will help us at the time of death. So it's effective when contemplating this to imagine that time. Imagine yourself getting close to death, and maybe it's most comfortable to imagine you're dying of illness or old age rather than a sudden death like in a car accident. So see if you can imagine yourself lying in a bed in a hospital or at home. And you've been ill for some time. So your body has been getting gradually weaker. And the doctors have done everything they could to keep you alive, but they've informed you that there's no more they can do, and it's just a matter of time. So you have that awareness that death is coming soon. So most people, when finding themselves in a difficult situation, turn to family and friends for support, for help, for comfort. So just contemplate that and ask yourself, can my family and friends help me at this time? Would they be able to give me the support I need, especially spiritual, emotional support to help me get through this difficult time? secondly, people turn to their wealth, possessions to give them help, support, comfort when they're facing difficulties. So are those able to help us at the time of death? Remember, when we die, we leave everything behind. We can't take anything with us, even one article of clothing, one cent of our money, one of our favorite items or heirlooms or whatever. So all of those material things that we have, that we enjoy, that we use, they all have to be left behind. Thirdly is our body. So during our life, we use our body in all different ways, including pleasure, sports, athletics, traveling. So we can have a lot of fun, a lot of enjoyment with our body. But again, that has to be left behind. Death, according to Buddhism, is the separation of our mind and our body. Our mind will leave this body and travel on to another life. So this body has to be left behind. We can't take it with us. And as we're dying, it may give us a lot of trouble. It may be physical pain, discomfort, inability to take care of ourselves, even go to the bathroom, brush our teeth, take a sip of water. So can our body help us at the time of death? So all of these things are left behind when we die, and only our mind, our consciousness travels on to the next life. So what can give us help, support, comfort at that time? So the Buddhist teachings say that Dharma, spiritual practice, can help us. One way is if we practice Dharma during our life, we learn how to manage our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, how to reduce disturbing, negative states of mind like anger, anxiety, depression, attachment, self-centeredness. So those are states of mind that are disturbing, painful, unpleasant. But we can reduce them. We can learn how to manage them so we're not overwhelmed by them. We can also learn to increase states of mind that are positive, constructive, beneficial, peaceful, make us feel good, make people around us feel good. So those include loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, generosity, patience, and wisdom, understanding things correctly. So during our life, we can learn how to cultivate those states of mind so that we can call them up, generate them quickly whenever we need to. So if we practice that during our life, then even at that time when we're leaving this life and facing a lot of difficulties, if we're familiar with Dharma, we can use it to put our mind into a positive state and keep our mind from being overwhelmed by disturbing, painful thoughts and emotions. Now that's one way Dharma, spiritual practice, can help us at the time of death. And then another important way Dharma helps us at the time of death is in terms of our karma. This is the most basic practice of Dharma. Learning about karma, what kind of actions are negative, to be avoided, what kind of actions are positive, virtuous, and to be practiced. So if during our life we tried our best to refrain from negative actions and purified those that we did create and put our energy into creating good karma, virtuous karma, then at the end of our life, we'll have more positive, virtuous karma, less negative karma, and that will put our mind at ease and also give us a sense of confidence that in our next life, we'll be born in a good situation rather than a painful, unfortunate one. So if that makes sense to you, then see if you can conclude this meditation with a decision or determination, a resolve to learn and practice Dharma as much as you can now while you still have time before you come to the end of your life. Understanding that Dharma will be helpful at that time. So when you feel ready to come out of the meditation, you can slowly open your eyes, change your position if you need to. I was thinking of a weekend course that I did on this topic some years ago in one of the centers in California. And I led a meditation, not quite like this one, but I asked people to imagine that there's going to be the end of the world, like these disaster movies where a meteor comes and crashes into the earth, and everyone's going to die. So if that was going to happen, people knew that at a certain point in time, this world would come to an end. Where would you like to be? Where would you like to spend the last hours of your life? And so then after doing the meditation, people shared what they came up with. And most people said they wanted to be with their family. They wanted to be with their loved ones. But one man who's kind of a long-term practitioner, he said he wanted to be in the Dharma center with the Geshe. And I thought, because realistically, what are you going to do with your family and friends? If they're ordinary people, probably just hold each other's hands, but be scared and, okay, maybe express your love for each other, which is very nice, very beautiful. But will they really be able to help you be in a good state of mind for the end of your life? So anyway, it's something to think about, something to contemplate for yourself. But I would definitely want to be with my teachers, or at least with my Dharma friends who know about Dharma and know how to practice, how to say prayers, how to say mantras, how to generate positive thoughts. And that's what's really beneficial. And I knew one nun who died some years ago, and she had cancer. And in California, at Land of Medicine Buddha, I don't know if it's still there, but they have a little house which is for people who are dying. It's something to do with Tara, something. The name is related to Tara. So when someone is terminally ill and they're approaching death, they can request to go and stay in this house, and then there's a group of volunteers to help them. And it's a very peaceful environment. It's right in the middle of a Dharma center, so it's like really ideal. So this one nun was staying in that house, and just before she died, Kirti Sencha Rinpoche, who's a wonderful Lama, happened to visit, and he was in that teaching. So he paid her a visit and spent time with her and did lots of prayers. And then Lama Zopa Rinpoche shortly afterwards came and also spent time with her many hours. And so I thought, and then shortly after that, she passed away. And I thought, oh, how fortunate she is. I hope that happens to me. That would be the best way, because on your own, unless your mind is really, really strong, it could be hard to manage fear and other kinds of disturbing thoughts coming up. So if you have, these beings like these lamas, and they know what to say, what to do, how to help you be in a good state of mind. So that would be ideal, but not everyone is that fortunate. So that's why it's really good to learn how to do that on our own, like during our life, to learn these practices. Medicine Buddha, Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, Medicine Buddha is really the best practice to do before we die, while we are dying, and afterwards, to ask the people around us to do Medicine Buddha practice. But, any practice you feel comfortable with, Tara. I mean, they're all Buddhas. They're all enlightened beings. They all have this compassion and this wish to help us. So just learning how to practice visualizing those deities, reciting prayers and mantras and so on, that's really, really helpful. So if we do that during our life, especially when we're finding, we're facing difficulties, and then instead of freaking out, drinking, or, what most people do when they're having problems, they escape. They try to escape with drugs and alcohol or entertainment or whatever. So instead of turning to those methods, which aren't really helpful, turning to Dharma methods. So training ourselves during our life to do that makes it more likely that that's what we'll do. It will just become like automatic. Okay, so I had some other things I wanted to share. partly related to this. So there's two attitudes that people sometimes have with regard to death, which aren't helpful. And it's good to check if we have either of these in our mind, and if so, then work on them. So one attitude is excessive fear. So I've met some people who tell me that they are just terrified of death, and they can't even think about it. They wouldn't even come to a course like this because they just don't want to hear about it or think about it or talk about it. And it's difficult if you have that. And if that is the case, it's better not to perpetuate it, but to try to deal with it. And in fact, just last year in the Abbey, we have a lot of visitors coming for courses or just for a stay. So there was this one woman who came, and I was sitting across from her at breakfast and just talking. And she told me that she worked as a funeral director for 25 years, and she left that and now is doing something else. And I said, "Oh, that's an interesting occupation. I think some people wouldn't want to do that, to be around bodies and so on." And she said, well, she did it deliberately because she was so afraid of death. She was terrified of death. So she deliberately went into a profession that would force her to confront death and overcome her fears of it. So I asked her, is that the case? And she said, yeah, that really did help her to overcome her fear of death. So instead of just avoiding it because you're so uncomfortable with it, it's good to, you don't have to be a funeral director or a mortician. Is that the same as mortician? Yeah. But doing courses like this, reading books about it, there's lots of ways you can just become more familiar with death. And gradually, it'll probably take a while, but gradually your fear can decrease. You just become more comfortable with it. And then another attitude is kind of the opposite, and that is to be sort of careless, to have an attitude of, oh, death is no big deal. You just die and that's it, nothing to worry about. So that attitude is probably also not very helpful. And in fact, I had that attitude when I was a teenager. And up until I went to Kopan Monastery in Nepal and did my first meditation course, I had this thought, oh yeah, no big deal. You just die and that's it. And then at my first meditation course, it was in the spring of 1974. And in those days, I don't know if you've been to Kopan now. Kopan is really nice. But in those days, it was very primitive. There were just a couple of buildings and old, kind of broken down buildings. And when we had meditation courses, they rented a big tent. And it wasn't sort of a nice tent, but it was all dilapidated. There were just straw mats on the ground. And so it was pretty uncomfortable. Anyway, one night, we were sitting and doing meditation. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was leading a meditation. And suddenly there was an earthquake. And even though I come from California, I had never experienced an earthquake before. And so the ground was like shaking. And Kopan is up on a hill, and it's surrounded by villages, little Nepali villages. And so you could hear people screaming and children crying and dogs barking. There was this sort of chaotic noise in the atmosphere. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche suddenly, in a very serious voice, said, meditate on bodhicitta. And my mind just freaked out. I couldn't think of bodhicitta. My thought was, we're going to die. This is it. And he's telling us to meditate on bodhicitta because that's the best thing to have in your mind when you die. But I couldn't. I was just terrified. My mind just got overwhelmed by this fear, like panic, frozen with panic is how I would describe it. And that lasted, I don't know how long. It seemed like an eternity, but it was probably just a few seconds. And then the shaking stopped. Everything got kind of calm and quiet. And I thought, thank goodness. But that experience was really, it was painful, of course, to see how much fear I had. I didn't realize, I wasn't aware that I would be afraid of death. But it left me with this sense that I don't want to die like that. I don't want my mind to be in a state of fear and panic when I'm dying. I want to be in a good state of mind. I would like to be able to think of bodhicitta when I die. So for me, that was a great teaching. And it really made this meditation very relevant. You know, I felt, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to be prepared for death and be able to die with a good state of mind, a positive state of mind, and not be overwhelmed by fear. So this is the danger of thinking, you know, it's like a flippant attitude, you know, oh, death is no big deal. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to prepare for it. And in fact, in this book called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sangye Rinpoche, he quotes a Tibetan master who said, people often make the mistake of being frivolous about death and think, oh, well, death happens to everybody. It's not a big deal. It's natural. I'll be fine. That's a nice theory until one is dying. So that's what so that's what I discovered. And I'm glad that I discovered it when I did. I was 21 at that time. So yeah, but I guess some people may carry that attitude with them all the way to the end of their life and then find out too late that they're not really prepared for death. And it is a big deal. And yeah, so I really appreciate this meditation, the 9-point meditation. I think it's very, very helpful. And that's why I'm happy to have the chance to teach it to people. And so I think the ideal state of mind to have is in between those two extremes. So one extreme is being just terrified. I can't even think about it. And the other extreme is, oh, no big deal. No need to think about it. No need to prepare for it. It'll be fine. So in between those two extremes, I think it's good to have a healthy sense of fear, not in a negative sense, not negative fear, but just, for example, the kind of fear we have of a car accident. I remember when I first started learning to drive, we had to watch these movies that show car crashes and bloody bodies, and it's pretty awful to watch those, but it does instill in you a sense of, yeah, a car is a dangerous weapon. And if you don't drive carefully, you don't follow the laws, you don't, you know, buckle up and drive at the speed limit, then this is what could happen. And so in the beginning, you know, I was kind of really nervous about driving, but after a while, you know, you get used to it and you learn how to do it and how to obey the rules, and then your fear calms down. And so similar with death. I mean, we do need to face the reality of death. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a challenging experience. But if we train ourselves during our life what to do, how to deal with it, then, you know, that fear will calm down, and we'll have a sense of confidence that, yeah, I'm ready for this. I can do this. So there's a book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Wholesome Fear, published by Wisdom. And so it contains some of his teachings on death. And he does talk about, you know, the importance of getting in touch with the fear of death, because it is there. And we don't want to wait till the last moment to have to face it and then deal with it. So it's better to be aware of it while we're alive and then use that fear to live our life in such a way that we will be prepared for death when it happens. We'll know what to do. We'll know how to manage. So I like the title of the book. The editors came up with it. Wholesome Fear. Yeah, it's a positive fear, a healthy fear, a reasonable fear, rather than an unhealthy one that just overwhelms you and you're kind of lost. You don't know what to do. So I recommend that book. Do you know if it's in the library? Has anyone seen it in the library here? Anyway. So another thing I wanted to talk about was with regard to physical suffering, because I think this is one reason that people may be afraid of death, is they are worried that it will be painful and they may not be able to handle the pain. And that's something I feel as well. I'm not very good at handling pain. So if there's going to be pain, my mind might freak out. Not everybody experiences pain when they die. So it isn't something that happens to everybody, but it is possible. So it is good to learn how to deal with that. And with regard to medication, that came up a little bit yesterday. My understanding is that according to Buddhism, and I think Lama Zopa Rinpoche said this as well, that it's okay to take medication for pain. Yeah. Some people might think, oh, you shouldn't take any medication. You should just tough it out. And some people do. I mean, some people are able to do that. But if you're not able to do that, it is okay to take medication. If you can take it in such a way that you still have some clarity in your mind. And I think in hospice and palliative care, they do have that ability to administer medication just to the extent that your pain is reduced, not overwhelming, unbearable, but you still have some clarity in your mind. But my understanding is that the mind does have a role to play in how effective medication is, because when my mother passed away, I was her caregiver. She was registered with the local hospice, but she died at home. And the hospice, they would come and visit, and they gave us a box of medicine, which included morphine. And I just put that in the fridge, and I thought, I hope I never have to deal with that. But towards the end, even though she had cancer, her whole internal organs were full of cancer, stage 4 cancer, which can be very painful, my understanding is. But she didn't have any pain. Just towards the end, she got a little bit confused and a little bit nauseous, but she had no pain. So I didn't have to use the morphine, thankfully. And after she passed away, I met a Dharma practitioner who was also a nurse and had worked in hospitals for 35 years. And I told her about this experience. And she said that in her experience, working with a lot of people who are dying and a lot of cancer patients, she observed that people whose minds are more peaceful and calm and positive as they're facing death have less pain. And even if they have some pain, the medication will be effective in reducing their pain. On the other hand, people whose minds are disturbed, who are angry, who are frightened, who are grasping, so they're not in a very good state of mind, they are more likely to have pain. And even if they take medication, it won't be as effective. So that's clear that our mental state has an effect on our physical suffering. So if we can be, learn how to keep our mind positive and not overwhelmed by negative thoughts and emotions, then there will be less physical suffering. So that's good to know. And then I wanted to share something from this book, which contains quotations from the sutra. So there's this one sutra. I'll just tell the story. I won't read the whole thing because it's a bit long. So the Buddha was visited by one disciple whose name was Nakula. And it says he's 120 years old. Wow. And his body was quite weak and ill and, not in very good shape. But he really wanted to see the Buddha. So he came to where the Buddha was with his disciples and paid his respects to the Buddha and asked for a teaching that will enable him to have peace of mind. And the Buddha, expressed praised that he managed to come and see him, even though he's aged and ill. And he said to this man, householder, you should know when the body is suffering from disease, you should constantly train so that the mind does not suffer from disease. And then the Buddha became silent, and the man thanked him and left. And nearby, Shariputra, one of Buddha's main disciples, was sitting under a tree, and this man Nakula went to Shariputra and also paid respects. And then they had a little conversation, and the householder Nakula asked Shariputra to explain what the Buddha meant, because the Buddha didn't really say much. And then Shariputra gave this long teaching on what the Buddha actually meant. And I'll just read a little bit of it. I should have brought my glasses. No, it's okay. So Shariputra said, a foolish, unlearned worldling does not understand as it really is the arising of bodily form, the cessation of bodily form, the gratification in bodily form, the danger in bodily form, and the escape from bodily form. Because of not understanding it as it really is, the worldling craves with delight for bodily form, declaring bodily form to be the self or to belong to the self, clinging and taking hold of it. So, and then he proceeds to talk about this in a similar way, the other 5 aggregates. So this is the traditional way of explaining a human being or a being, that they're composed of these 5 aggregates, which basically boil down to 2 in a simple way, body and mind. So we are basically made up of body and mind. And so basically what Shariputra is saying, that ordinary people who are unlearned, who haven't learned the Buddhist teachings and don't know how to develop wisdom, but are immersed in ignorance. And so when they face difficulties in life, they don't react in a very wise way, because basically they think that the body is the self. You know, most people think this is me. So they identify very strongly with the body, thinking it's me or it belongs to me. They think of the self as being the owner of the body. So they're very caught up with the body, and they seek gratification of the senses. So most people are just immersed in experiencing pleasure with their 5 senses, beautiful visual objects, sounds, smells, tastes. So totally caught up in pleasure of the 5 senses. And they don't understand the impermanent nature of the body. They don't realize that this body is changing and getting older and will eventually die. And so people who are of that frame of mind get upset when pleasure disappears and unpleasant things appear. And so this is how ordinary people, unlearned people, react when the body is sick. And then their mind also gets sick. Their mind suffers when the body suffers. And then Shariputra went on to explain how it's possible that even when the body is sick, the body is suffering, the mind doesn't have to be sick. And so somebody who has learned the Buddhist teachings and is practicing the Buddhist teachings and has developed wisdom and is able to understand impermanence, the impermanent nature of the body, and also the impermanent nature of our sensory experiences, that, you know, all our pleasant experiences, visual, sounds, smells, tastes, and such, those are also impermanent. They don't last. And the pleasure we experience with those things is also impermanent and doesn't last. And so one no longer, you know, grasps at those things, craves those things, has attenuated their desire, their attachment to those things. So somebody who has trained themselves in that way, then even when the body is sick, the body's suffering, their mind will not suffer as well. So it's kind of a long teaching. I'm just summarizing it. And Bhikkhu Analayo, who wrote this book, Analayo, I guess it is, he gives some advice on how we can practice this. My eyes are getting really bad. Too much computer. Yeah, so he says it's good to learn mindfulness, practice mindfulness. Learning to clearly see that body, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness, those are the 5 aggregates, basically body and mind, that these are impermanent phenomena. And the gratification that we can experience in relation to our body and mind can lead to there's the danger of clinging and attachment, resulting in more suffering. Once conditions change and we no longer have pleasure, but we have unpleasant things instead. So the resulting understanding is the fertile soil within which freedom from attachment and a lessening of identification can grow, leading to the ability to remain with a healthily non-attached mind, even when experiencing strong pain and serious disease. In practical terms, when strong pain arises, instead of succumbing to the natural tendency to own it as mine, this is my pain, which gives rise to all sorts of apprehensions about what this pain is doing to me now and what's going to do to my future, one might try just to be aware of the fluctuating physical sensations of pain. By remaining in present moment awareness of painful sensations without appropriating them as mine and reacting to them mentally, much of the mental affliction caused by physical pain can be avoided. So this is how the mind can gradually learn not to suffer along with the body. So it does take time to learn how to do this. It's not easy. But there's a book called Mindfulness in Plain English by Bhante Gunaratana. It's been around a long time, and it's a very, very beautiful book. And there's a whole section in there on how to deal with pain. It's like a meditation for dealing with pain. And this is basically what he suggests is when there's pain. Of course, he says, if you know, you can try to relieve the pain, take some medication, you know, change your posture, change your clothing, or whatever, you know, to try to relieve the pain. But in spite of all those things, there still may be some pain. And so he suggests in a meditative way to focus on that place where the pain is. And first of all, relax, because often what happens is the muscles in that area will tighten up. I mean, this is not, we don't do it deliberately or consciously, but just it's a bodily reaction, the tightening around that area, and that just exacerbates the pain. So he says, if we put our awareness on that place and then relax those muscles, relax the tension in that area, that will relieve some of the pain. And then he says, and then do a similar thing with the mind. Look at what your mind is doing with that pain. It's probably saying something like, oh, this is terrible. I can't bear it. I can't stand it. Go away. You know, so the mind is reacting with fear. And that also doesn't help. It just makes things worse. So instead, he says, just try to relax the pain and observe it. Observe what's actually going on in that place. And what you'll find is it's probably not as solid as it appears to be. It's not like this solid block of pain, but you'll see it moving and changing, fluctuating. I did this once with a headache. I had this headache, and I'd had it for a couple of days, and it didn't go away in spite of taking Tylenol or whatever. So one night I was trying to go to sleep, and it was hard to get to sleep because of this pain in my head. So I tried this. I just focused on the pain and just observed what was there. And it was like really fascinating. I could see that, there was different sensations coming and going and moving here and there. And I just got really fascinated with what was happening. And before I knew it, I was asleep. And when I woke up, the pain was gone. So don't expect that to happen. It might happen, but it might not. But even to just recognize that the pain is not as solid and permanent and, unbearable as you might think, that itself can relieve the pain. So there are things, anyway, the point is there are things we can do meditatively, in a meditative way to learn to be more tolerant of pain. And that can be very helpful just in case the medication doesn't work. Because apparently I've spoken with people who work in pain clinics, helping people who are suffering from pain. And one of these people told me that it doesn't always work. And in fact, they gave me the statistics, which are kind of shocking. It only works for about 30% of the people. So 70% of people who suffer from chronic pain do not get relief from pain medication. So I know this one doctor who's actually studied Eastern methods like acupuncture and meditation and so on. And he works in a pain clinic to try to help people who don't get relief from medication, and they can get relief from meditation or other alternate methods. So it's useful. It's useful to have that in our toolbox, learning how to deal with pain spiritually and mentally. So I thought that I didn't give you a break yesterday, and I thought that might be difficult for some of you. So how about if we just have 5 minutes break at this point, and then continue on. So this next slide is on the benefits of meditating on death. This is from the Lam, and I think it's helpful. They often have this kind of thing in the Lam when they present a topic, and they give you the benefits of doing this and the disadvantages of not doing it. So it's like the pros and the cons, the carrot and the stick. And I find that really helpful. Because some of these practices aren't so appealing. Like, meditating on death isn't something we kind of jump into with joy, like jumping into a swimming pool. That if you can understand, okay, it may not be so easy and comfortable, but it's good for me. Yeah, it's like with exercise or like with certain types of food. If you know it's good for you, you're more likely to do it. So when it says meditating on death, that doesn't just mean, occasionally, once a year, once a month. But ideally, on a daily basis, it's good to think about death every day and just to have that awareness that, I don't know when it's going to happen, and I want to live my life in a wise way, in a careful way, within that understanding that I'm not going to be here forever. So I'll just go through these quickly, but they're in the Lam if you want to study them more. So the first is that our actions will be very beneficial. So if we have this awareness of death and use it wisely, then it will help us with our karma. Karma means action. So our actions, the things we do, will become more beneficial. We'll be more likely to create good karma, do good deeds, and avoid bad karma, bad deeds. Realizing that if we create bad karma, we're going to experience suffering and problems later on. Maybe in this life, future lives, but it's going to come back at us like the boomerang, come back and hit us in the head. So having that awareness will help with our karma. And the second is our spiritual practice will become very powerful. So it really gives a boost to our practice. That's definitely my experience after I had that close encounter with death at a first meditation course. So it really made me feel, yes, spiritual practice. It's not just something I do for fun, for pleasure, a hobby, but it's really, really important to put my energy into this. And then third is it is important at the beginning of your practice. So for many people, it's like often their first. There's plenty of seats if you want to come in and yeah. Often people get interested in spiritual practice because of death. They may lose a loved one or have a close call with death, and it's like, wow, it kind of wakes them up and they realize they need to do something in a spiritual way with their life. So it can get us going in spiritual practice. I remember I was just thinking about this one person I know, and he told me that he was just in his 20s when he got cancer, and he said it was the best thing that happened in his life for two reasons. One was because while he was recovering, while he was going through treatment and so on, he needed to rely on his family, and he wasn't on very good terms with his family. So this kind of pushed him to make peace with his family, resolve issues with his family. And so that cleared away and that became much more comfortable for him. And the second benefit was that it got him interested in spiritual practice. He started meditating and he recovered, obviously. And then later he became a monk, and he's been studying at Sarah Monastery for many years now. He's probably on his way, probably close to becoming a geshe, and he's very happy. Last time I met him in India, he looked so happy, like he really found something meaningful and fulfilling in his life. That's just one example of how, something that can look like a tragedy, like getting ill or getting injured or whatever, can really wake us up and help us realize the importance of spirituality and bring that into our life. And then the next one, it's important in the middle of your practice, meaning, we often start off with a lot of enthusiasm, but after a while, we might lose interest and, not really, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. So the awareness of death, awareness that, this life isn't going to last forever. I could die at any point. So that can help us get over those bumps of losing interest in the spiritual practice and keep going. And then important at the end of the practice, meaning if we maintain this awareness of death and impermanence and so on, that can keep us going all the way to the end. I mean, the end is enlightenment, which we probably won't get to in this lifetime, but it will, awareness of death will keep us going in our practice so that we can continue life after life after life and eventually reach the end of the practice, which is enlightenment. And the last one, this is a great one. You will die with a peaceful, happy mind, free of regrets. So if we do live our life with this awareness that death is going to happen, and use that awareness to live a good life, refrain as much as we can from creating negative karma, doing hurtful things to others and so on, and create as much good karma as we can, and be kind and helpful and generous, and learn how to have our mind in a good state. So if we live our life in that way, then when we do come to the end, at the time of death, our mind will be peaceful and not so frightened, and we'll have a happy mind and not overwhelmed by regrets. So I really saw that with my mother, and I was kind of surprised in a way. I didn't think she had it in her. She wasn't like a Lama or a yogi or, great meditator. So it made me realize you don't have to be a great practitioner. You don't have to be highly accomplished or highly realized to have a good death. As long as you really take these teachings to heart and really have faith, have devotion, and be kind and helpful as much as you can, help others, not be so selfish and attached and so on. So yeah, even with the basic practice of Dharma, it is possible to have a good death, have a positive, peaceful state of mind at the time of death. And then the Lama also mentions 6 disadvantages of not remembering death. And so those are the cons. That's the stick. And so then I won't, they're just basically the opposite of these. So if we don't remember death, we won't remember Dharma. Our mind will just, our life will just go, full of other things. And I didn't put those on the slide, so don't worry. So we might just procrastinate and not practice the Dharma. And then the second one is, even if you do remember the Dharma, you may not practice it. Okay, so we might think, I really should practice. I really should meditate. But then you get busy with other things and not get around to it. So death really helps us to realize, no, I can't procrastinate. I really have to do this. And then the third one is that even if you practice Dharma, you may not practice it purely. Like I was saying yesterday, the 8 worldly concerns might creep into our practice, and our practice may become corrupt by those. Attachment to material gain, attachment to fame, to praise, and so on. So then it's not so pure. And the fourth is your practice will not be persistent. So we might practice for a while, but then lose interest after a while, give it up, or, be on and off. Sometimes do it, sometimes not. So that's not ideal. And the fifth is that you may create a lot of negative actions. So without awareness of death, we might, negative thoughts, attitudes, impulses coming up. We might find ourselves doing things that are negative, creating negative karma. Of course, we can't be totally pure all the time. We're just ordinary people, so we do sometimes make mistakes. But at least there's the practice of purification that we can do when we do make mistakes. So if we make a regular practice of purification, like every day, at the end of the day, it's good to look back over the day and think, what did I do? Did I do something wrong, something negative, something non-virtuous? And then do a purification practice for that. And the sixth is you will have many regrets at the time of death. So living in that way, not thinking about death, creating negative karma and so on, then at the time of death, our mind won't be so peaceful, and we may have a lot of things to regret. Okay, so then next I'd like to move on to more specific things. I've already been talking about these, but just to really focus on specific things that we can do to prepare for death. So first I'd like to share with you something from this book. It's been around quite a while now, but when I first read it, I thought it was great. It's called Facing Death and Finding Hope by Christine Longacre. She, her story is that she must have been just in her 20s when her husband died. She said that he had leukemia, and, for the last year of his life, they were working with that and trying to cope with that. And then he finally died, and he was just in his 20s. So she was probably just in her 20s as well. That's pretty young to lose your husband. And she had just a 1-year-old child as well that she then had to raise on her own. So she was pretty devastated by the loss of her husband and went through a lot of grief. But it also motivated her to start helping dying people. So she began volunteering in hospice, and and I think she had like 20 years before writing this book. She had 20 years of experience working with dying people. And she was a student of Sangye Rinpoche, who also did a lot of work with dying people. And so she, in the book, it's not really a Buddhist book in the sense of, exclusively 100% Buddhist, but there are Buddhist ideas and Buddhist practices mixed with just practical ways of dealing with dying people. So based on her experience, she formulated what she calls 4 tasks of living and dying. And so these are things we can practice ourselves to prepare for death and help others if we are in the position of loved ones, friends, and so on who are dying. So I'll just briefly mention them, and if you're interested, you can get that book. So the first is understanding and transforming suffering. And so basically what that means is coming to an acceptance of the various problems and difficulties and painful experiences, which are an inevitable part of life. So we all experience suffering. That's the first noble truth that the Buddha taught. And it's just like a fact of life. If we're alive, we're human beings or any kind of being, there will be suffering. There will be problems. It's just impossible to go through life and never have any problems. But problems don't have to be unbearable and overwhelm us. And, if we can learn how to deal with suffering, then even if we're having a problem, mentally, our mind doesn't have to suffer so much. So if we can learn to work with our mind, then we can reduce the suffering when problems do occur in our life. So there are ways we can learn to cope with problems and suffering. And if we can learn how to cope with smaller problems that we encounter as we go through life and learn how to deal with those wisely, then when we come to the end of our life, death is probably the most challenging experience of life. And so if we've already learned how to deal with smaller problems, then when we come to this big problem at the end of our life, we will already have some experience and we'll know how to deal. We'll be able to deal with it better. So that's basically what that is all about. So we can ask ourselves, like, when I do face problems in life, how do I react? How do I deal with them? Do I freak out? Do I try to run away, escape with alcohol, drugs? There's so many, more and more all the time. With the internet and social media and entertainment and so on. So there's lots of ways that people use to try to avoid, to try to escape from problems, not have to face them, not have to deal with them. So we probably all tried those. Do they work? Do they help? Sometimes they just make things worse. You get addicted. Your health suffers, and they're expensive, and so on. So there's this kind of side effects to those escape routes. So instead of doing that, then how about trying to work with your mind? And that's really what Buddhism is all about. Basically, Buddhism, the essence of Buddhism, the core of Buddhism is learning to work with the mind, learning to how to transform the mind. And if you try that out, it's not easy. It does take time, does take effort, but it's much more satisfying, and it works. Yeah. So these methods do work. They do help to relieve the mental suffering, and you don't have to try those other things. And so just some examples within the Tibetan tradition. Meditation, of course, learning mindfulness, practicing mindfulness. So that is a way that will help us to keep our mind more calm, even when we're facing difficulties. Compassion. So this is what Lama Zopa Rinpoche emphasized again and again and again, like those lovely posters they've made. Live with compassion. Do this with, I can't remember all the things, but yeah, if we can bring compassion into our lives and in the various experiences we have and the various things that we do in our life, do those things with compassion, then even at the end of our life, we'll be able to die with compassion, have compassion in our mind at the end of our life. So he says that's really the best state of mind that we could have at the time of death, is compassion and love, caring about others, and having this wish, this prayer that wherever I go, whatever happens to me in my next life, I want to be able to help others. I want to do what's beneficial, what's good for others, and not harm. So that's such a beautiful, positive state of mind to have. And it relieves suffering. The Dalai Lama talks about an experience he had. There was, I don't know how many years ago it was, but many people had gathered in Bodh Gaya. I was one of them. He was supposed to give the Kali Chakra initiation. And he had, I think it was gallbladder. He had to have the gallbladder removed. But anyway, he was in so much pain that he couldn't give these teachings, and they had to take him to the hospital in Patna, which is a couple hours drive away. There's no good hospital in Bodh Gaya, so they had to drive him in a car to Patna. And he said on the way, he was sitting in the car and he had so much pain, but he was looking out the window at, it's kind of a very poor area, a lot of poverty, and seeing these little children dressed in rags and skinny and just playing in the dirt, and seeing elderly people just, sitting there, lying by the side of the road, looking like they had nobody to take care of them. So he saw just lots of people who were suffering, and focusing on them and contemplating their suffering and feeling compassion for them. He didn't feel his own pain. Yeah. So it's very practical, if we're focused on my pain, my suffering, then it can seem huge, enormous, unbearable. But when we focus on other people and their suffering, and realize some people have worse suffering than we do, some people's problems are worse than mine. So it takes our attention away from our problem. And so then instead of seeming huge, it seems smaller and more manageable. So it's a very practical way of dealing with our problems. So I recommend that. And then there's the practice of Tonglen, taking and giving, which probably many of you have heard about. Maybe if we have time later, we can do that. So it's based on compassion, and it's generating the wish, may I take on the suffering of others and use that to overcome my self-centeredness, my tendency to just focus on me and my problems. So we take on the suffering of others and use it in that way, and then give to others our own happiness, our good karma, our resources, whatever good things we have. We imagine sending those out to others. So that's a very powerful practice for transforming our mind. When you're involved in that practice, you're not focused on your suffering. You're not feeling miserable. So these are just some examples, but there's lots. There's a book called Transforming Problems into Happiness by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So that goes through different methods that you can use when you are facing problems in life, and how you can use those problems as part of your practice and help with the growth of compassion and wisdom and other spiritual qualities. Yeah. So learning those, and if we start with small problems, a headache or a little bit of discomfort in the body or a little bit of inconvenience, you're stuck in a traffic jam or whatever, relatively small problems. We train with those, use these methods to deal with those, and then gradually we can do it with bigger problems, and eventually in that way, when we come to this big problem at the end of our life, we're a pro. We will be able to easily use that experience in the path. And then the second of the 4 tasks is making a connection, healing relationships, and letting go. So this has to do with our relationships with others, particularly those we are close to, family, friends, people we work with, neighbors, and so on. So the main points here are to learn how to communicate honestly and with compassion and with as much unselfishness as we can, and bring compassion and love and altruism into our communication with others, and resolve any unresolved problems that we may have. So I talked about that already yesterday, how important that is, how helpful that is, so that there's nothing left at the time of death to feel regret about and feel bad about and feel worried about. So really try to take care of those problems as we go through life, and don't just leave them hanging. And because sometimes it may be too late by the end of our life. Maybe the person we had a problem with has already passed away, so we can't really communicate with them, or they're far away, we can't reach them. So it's better not to leave any of those things unresolved, so we can just die with a clear mind, feeling good about our relationships with others. And forgiveness, learning to forgive. It may take a lot of time in some cases to develop forgiveness for others, but it's worthwhile. And one thing that people don't understand about forgiveness, some people think if someone's done something really, really terrible, forgiving them means saying it's okay, what they did was okay. But it doesn't mean that. Forgiveness means letting go of your anger, letting go of your resentment. You can still acknowledge the wrongness of what the person did. Yeah, forgiveness doesn't mean condoning a wrong action, a harmful action. You can still say what that person did was wrong. However, I'm not going to hang on to anger and resentment towards them. And it's for our own good. It's not necessarily for the other person's good, but for our own good. Because if we hang on to anger and hatred, we are making ourselves suffer. And if we can realize that, we want to get rid of that. We want to drop the anger, because we care about ourselves. If you care about yourself, you want yourself to be happy and peaceful, then it's best to let go of anger and resentment. Otherwise, it's like you're continuing to make yourself suffer by having resentment, holding a grudge towards the other person. You're harming yourself. So if you can realize that, you'll want to forgive, you want to let go. But like I say, it can take time, may take your whole life to be able to let go of that anger and resentment towards someone who harmed you. But it's worth it. It's worth putting that energy in. Okay, the third one is preparing spiritually for death. And so what Christine writes in her book is, every religious tradition emphasizes that to prepare spiritually for death, it is vital that we establish right now a daily spiritual practice, a practice so deeply ingrained that it becomes part of our flesh and bones, our reflexive response to every situation in life, including our experiences of suffering. And I remember too, Stephen Levine, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's passed away now, but he was a practitioner of Buddhist meditation. And he also spent a long time, decades, working with dying people. And he wrote a number of books on helping people die. And in one of his books, he mentioned a Native American practice called a death chant. I don't know which Native American group used that. Maybe all of them did, but anyway, the idea of a death chant is when a person is an adolescent, they are taught this death chant. It's some kind of prayer or phrase that they learn, and they memorize it, and then they recite it whenever they're in danger. Like if they're out in the wilderness and they meet a dangerous animal, or they get lost, or whatever. They use the death chant to keep their mind calm so that it doesn't get overwhelmed by fear. So it's something they use during their life, but the real purpose of the death chant is to use it at the time of death. Sounds like a mantra. Yeah, a mantra, something you chant, you repeat, and it helps your mind stay calm rather than overwhelmed by fear. So that's, I mean, we have lots of practices like that in Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. Many, many mantras or prayers or phrases that we, practice during our life. We repeat, we recite during our life and get very familiar with. And then when we find ourselves in a death or near-death situation, that may come kind of automatically to us. So, yeah, I'll share another story. I already told you about the earthquake and how my mind just panicked. I couldn't think of anything positive. And then some years after that, I was visiting my family, and some of us were in a car going somewhere, and it was middle of winter, so there was snow and ice everywhere. And so I was in a car. It was actually my brother-in-law who's a pilot. He knows how to fly planes, and so he's quite good at driving as well. I was sitting in the back seat, but we were driving on this road that was just total ice. And all of a sudden, the car started spinning. And it was scary. I was sitting in the back seat, and I found myself just starting to recite Tara mantra. I didn't even think, oh, I better do this. It just happened. It was just like an automatic reaction. I was thinking of Tara and praying to Tara. And he managed to get the car into control. We didn't have a crash. But I was quite pleased to see that the way I reacted was quite different than the previous incident, that I'd been practicing enough that became automatic. It's like what she says here, it's just it's so ingrained. It's part of our flesh and bones, our reflexive response. It's just something that happens automatically. So that's the ideal. The ideal is to practice so well that will become our automatic reaction, so that even if we are in a situation like that, and we don't have much time to prepare, it will come automatically. So after going through this, I'll go through some other practices that we could train in during our life to prepare for death, because everyone's different. What one person finds useful and they're happy to do. Somebody else may say, no, I don't want to do that. But hopefully you'll find some kind of practice that you can train in during your life and get really familiar with, and something you can bring up, or something that will just automatically come up in at the time of death. And then the fourth point or task is finding meaning in life. So she says, a lot of people go through life without really understanding what is the purpose of life? Why am I here? And a lot of people just go on automatic, follow what their parents say, what society says. But in their heart, they don't really know why they're doing the things they do. And so some people come to the end of their life still not really clear, what that was all about. And that's very unfortunate, because then, at the end of life, you may find everything's kind of falling apart. Your health is falling apart. You're in pain. You're sick. You're dying. And then that can become a cause of despondency, despair, hopelessness. So on top of physical problems and the fact that you're dying, your mind is not in a good state. Yeah. And that would be very unfortunate, to have a state of mind like that at the time of death. So she says it's really good to explore this question of what is the purpose of life? Why am I here? What's important? What is meaningful for me to do in life? Buddhism has an answer, but it may not be the answer suited to you. So, this is something each person needs to explore. But the Buddhist answer is the purpose of life is, of course, we can say to be happy, but how? How do we find happiness in life? How do we find fulfillment in life? And it's not through drinking and drugging and all of that kind of thing. But what's really meaningful is compassion and love, altruism, caring about others, and being a good person, not harming others, not harming ourselves, but helping, doing what really brings genuine happiness. So this is, again, as I said yesterday, is what His Holiness, the message His Holiness, the Dalai Lama is always talking about, kindness. Because whether you believe in another life after this or not, even if you believe this is the only life we have, we want to be happy. We want to have a good life. We want to come to the end of our life and feel satisfied with the way we lived and at peace. And the way to do that is by having a good heart, kindness, compassion, and altruism, and being a good person. So that's an answer, a possible answer, but it's something we need to think about, to contemplate, to research, and come to our own conclusion about that. So I'm just briefly covering these, but the book goes into a lot more detail, and she also gives a lot of stories, a lot of accounts of people, and as they're approaching the end of their life, and what helps and doesn't help, and so on. So I recommend. It's quite a beautiful book, and even the title of the book is quite nice: Facing Death and Finding Hope. So, any questions on anything I've said so far this morning? And that includes people following online. Any of you have a question, you can unmute and ask. Yes.
When you're talking about healing relationships and making a connection. I was just curious, how much is it important to have the other party involved? Or is all of this work can be done on your own? And actually, once the person is gone, you can also build a relationship with them, even if they're not physically there.
Okay, I'll repeat the question for the people online. You probably didn't hear it. So with regard to the point about healing, was it healing relation? I forget what it's called. Healing, making a connection, healing relationships and letting go. How important is it for the other person to be involved? It's not always possible. Person may already have passed on, or they may not want to communicate. So even if you feel the wish to reach out to the other person and heal the relationship, there's no guarantee the other person will feel that way as well. So they may not want anything to do with you. So it's worth trying to do that, but don't expect that that will happen. And also don't feel that that is absolutely necessary. I was just remembering I taught this course last autumn, and there was one woman who is actually dying, and she mentioned somebody that there was a kind of problem with, and she had tried reaching out to that person, writing to that person, and the person just didn't respond at all. So she understood that, she can still work on that on her own. So you can, so it isn't 100% necessary to have the other person involved. So you can, if you can do it on your own, that's fine. Otherwise, you could seek help from therapists or spiritual teachers, how to do that. But the important thing is letting go of anger, letting go of resentment, letting go of any kind of wish to retaliate, wish to harm that person, because those types of minds are painful for us, not good for us. So realizing that, do what you can to get beyond those. And it may take time, but it's worth doing. I think I remember too, in Sangye Rinpoche's book, he mentioned something you can do even if the other person isn't alive or doesn't want to communicate, and that is just to write to the person, write a letter, and really express what's the word? Apologies for anything you may have done that was harmful or unwise or unskillful. Ask for forgiveness from the other person, express good feelings, good wishes for the other person. So you can write all of that. You don't have to send it, especially if the person's already passed away, but just writing it, putting it out there can be very helpful. Just to clear your own mind of any lingering negative thoughts or feelings. I actually did that after my mother passed away, because I had some things that I wished I had done or wished I had said and I didn't. And so I wrote it down, and it really felt good. Really felt healing and kind of closing the circle. I did it with my father as well. There were still some unfinished things with my father. So that can be very helpful. Anyone else? If you do think of any more questions, we can take them up after lunch. So we have another session this afternoon. So this afternoon, I'll talk about specific things we can do to prepare for death and things we can do to help others who are dying. So I hope I have time for all of that. But yeah, there's really a lot in Buddhism, a lot of, it's huge. But no, specific practices that can help us prepare for death. So I'll give a variety, and hopefully you'll find something within that you feel attracted to and feel that would work for you. So we'll stop here and make a mental dedication. We can just do this mentally. Feel a sense of joy or rejoicing that we spent this time, 2 hours, with a good motivation, altruistic motivation, wanting to help others, wanting to bring more spiritual insights and experiences both to ourselves and to others. So we had a good motivation, and then we spent this time looking at these beautiful teachings on how to bring that about. So we definitely created some merit, positive energy, and that's the cause of happiness and spiritual growth, the growth of spiritual qualities in our mind. So let's share this with all other living beings, wishing it will bring benefit to them, peace, happiness, and help them to find their way on a spiritual path that works for them and helps them have more love and compassion, live more ethically, give up negative thoughts and actions harmful to themselves, harmful to others, and help them actualize their potential for much higher things, more pure and positive and blissful states of mind. Okay, see you in a little while.